once we get this input if data, we're just going to keep on going. We're going to say if, and this is interesting, type of input data equals Boolean. So this is going to tell us, did we pass in a Boolean already or no? And if we did pass in a Boolean, then we don't need to convert it to a Boolean. It's already a Boolean. So we just return data equals input data, and that's it. Okay, but then over here we'll have an else. And here's where we do our switch statement again, like we talked about before. Switch input data dot to lowercase trim, and trim just removes any extra white space. Mm-hmm. And that's our switch, and we do case true in a string colon, and here's where I'm going to start doing that fall through that we talked about before. So case t colon case y colon case yes colon and case colon. Okay, so if it's any of those cases, return data equals true, break, and then we have our case false colon case f colon case n for no, case no, and case off. Return data equals false. Now we technically shouldn't have to set it to false because it's already set to false. We initialized it to false, but this is really just for completeness of code. Whatever. Break. We have to have our default in here. And return data equals false. Again, we've already set it to false when we initialize it, so, but again, it's also good for completeness of code. So break. Okay, that's the end of that function. So I don't know if you've ever watched the movie Tron.
Yeah.
The first one, not the new one.
The original ones.
Yeah, the original one.
Yeah.
There's a part where they're going through this canyon trying to avoid these tanks and ships or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
They end up crashing through a wall or something, or maybe it was inside when one of the guys is inside the tank, I think. And there's this little blobby spherical thing following them around, and the blobby spherical thing only answers yes, no, yes, no, yes.
Oh yeah. I think I remember that.
And he's like, "What are you?" And he says, "Yes." You know, are you a bit? Yes.
That's funny.
It's just hilarious. Okay, all right. So next is we're gonna have another business rule down here. We got a bunch of these. It's quite a lot. Export determine object data type equals function input data input metadata. Okay, that function determine object data type description determines if the contents of a string are actually a Boolean, integer, float, string, or something else. You can still see it. Okay, and this type is a string input. This one is a string input, and it's a string return. Now the input data has a little bit to it, a string that contains some value that we should figure out what kind of data type that data is. Boolean, integer, float, string, or something else. Metadata not used for this business rule, and return is a string that indicates if the data type should be Boolean, integer, float, string, or something else. Author. Oops, I misspelled author. 8 to 131. Now we just do our usual stuff, which is, I guess we can copy paste from up here somewhere. Want something that's decent. Just like one of these, I guess. It doesn't matter. Whoops. Whoa, what happened there?
The first one? Or are you doing the first one?
Yeah, it's string to data type is fine or whatever. It doesn't matter. Any one of them, even the one just above would be fine. Because we're just going to wipe out the guts of it inside the if input data. Like the rest of it stay. So you're just left with the if input data. And it's object data type. That come down here to the name.
So I'm left with if, okay.
Yeah, you'll take everything out except for the if. Now we'll say if is Boolean and empty string equals true. Then we say return data equals Boolean. Uppercase B. If is integer, input data, empty string equals true. Return data equals integer. Else if is float, input data, empty string equals true. Return data equals float, and else if is string, input data, empty string equals true. Return data equals string. Okay, and then we say else. And I'm going to put a note here that says, and I'll copy paste this as a long note. Otherwise, we cannot figure out what the data type is. We could go forever trying to figure out data logic and data types and data structures, and no, we're just not going to go down that road. No real way to tell the difference between short, long, and double. And we don't really need to tell the difference between all these complicated data types. At least not yet. So we'll just say return data equals object. And object could be whatever. So the next one is export const is Boolean equals function input data, input metadata, and this is that function that we just called right here on my line 172. It's going to work our way through those functions because we got to implement is Boolean, is integer, is float, is string. Function is Boolean. At description determines if the input string is a Boolean type of value, and then I'm going to say true, or T, Y, uppercase Y, yes, or all uppercase yes, on all lowercase o n uppercase o, or all uppercase on, or false all lowercase, false uppercase f, false all uppercase, f lowercase, uppercase f, lowercase n, uppercase n, no lowercase, no uppercase n, and no all uppercase. Okay, of type string, and Boolean. Okay, the string that should be checked if it is a Boolean style value or not. could be some form of true or false. And this one is input metadata not used for this business rule. And the return is a Boolean value of true or false to indicate if the input string is a Boolean author and date 31. Okay, so again, we'll just copy paste from up here. Contents of the function. I can just do the one right above it. Is Boolean, change that name first thing. Uh-oh, I see something that come out. No, the one above, the determine object data type, this input metadata, I have a JSON stringify and I should not have that. It should just be 1, 2. I copied it, so I need to take this well. And I got the name change. And then again, we'll wipe out everything inside the if, the first if input data. We'll say if type of input data equals Boolean. But we had, oops, this has to be a curly brace. It's kind of like what we had before in the other switch statement. Return data equals true. It's already a Boolean, well, true, because it is. Okay, else input data equals input data dot to lowercase dot trim. Say if input data equals true, or it's a double pipe, or input data equals, or input data equals y, or input equals yes, or oops, input data equals on, or, and at any point you could probably just like bring down in line, input data equals false, or input data equals f, or input data equals n, or input data equals no, input data equals return data equals true, because it is a Boolean, else return data equals false. And I should probably initialize return data to be false up here. If it's any of those things, it's a Boolean. It basically, if it's truthy or falsy in some form or fashion, it's a Boolean. That's kind of what we want to do. Mm-hmm. And believe me, I had code that was a lot more complicated than this. I used to have code that was input data, all lowercase true, input data equals uppercase T true, input data equals all uppercase true, and then I realized, let me just do this 2 lowercase and trim it. And when I did that, I'm like, oh, the code is so much cleaner. One is x const is integer.
That is string?
No. Function, input data, input metadata. And I think we're just about half done with this library. As it is now. I mean, not counting the other 2,500 lines we need later. For the current state that we're actually needing to implement for this training module, about half done with this file. At function integer description determines if the input string is an integer type of value, and there's specific values here like we had with the Boolean. It was true, true, false, false, on, off, business. But here we've got something else. This is a number. So minus 9007299 254740992 to the same number without the negative number, without the negative sign. Okay. Those are the limits of the integer in JavaScript. Okay, so data is string. This one type string. And this one is a Boolean. The string that should be checked. It is an integer style value or not. Can we evaluate it as an integer? The input metadata is not used for this business rule. And this one is a Boolean value of true or false. Indicate if the input string is an integer or not. One is the date. All right, next we can just copy the usual thing, contents of the function, just like we've been doing. Is integer. Wipe out everything inside the if. Change the name. Is integer. The way we implement this is a little bit different. It's a little logic-y. If is nan. Input data.
If not is what?
Just say if. The if not is nan. N-A-N. Yep.
What does that mean?
Not a number.
Not a number.
So not a number.
Right.
Got it? Yeah, it's a reverse of a.
Not. Okay. Is not a number. Not. Okay.
Yeah, it takes a little bit to get your head around it, but yeah. And then we say if input data modulus 1 equals 0, it's a whole number, aka integer. Return data equals true. And I'm putting a comment here. You have to do your comments like you do. Else clause is redundant, but kept here for code completeness. Might be a number, but not a whole number. And this comes back to what I mentioned before about code completeness. So return data equals false. It could be useful, like you could put console logs in here if you ever needed to debug it under very special circumstances. That's why I like to have this code complete, completeness of code, because you can actually debug it if you need to. Then we're going to add another else down here on this bracket. Else, same note, else clause is redundant, but it's here for completeness. And I'll add possibly also console log here for debugging. So that's why I leave it there, because you never know if you're going to need to debug this stuff. Return data equals false. And there are other ways of validating that it's a number or not a number, but I found that this is pretty low level enough for our purposes.
I'm missing something here.
Is float. Export const is float equal function input. Okay. That function is float at description determines if the input string is a floating point type of value or not. This is a string. A Boolean. Okay, the string that should be checked if it is integer. Oh, that should be float. If it is a float style value or not. Okay, the input metadata is not used for this business rule. And the return is a Boolean value of true or false to indicate if the input string is a floating point number or author. Date. I'm going to say floating point number, style, or not. So we'll copy paste again, contents of the function. Just go right out of is integer. Wipe out the if. Cool. Change the function name. Determine object data type should be an empty string. A string to Boolean, yes. String to data type, that one could be empty string also.
The empty string?
Empty string, yeah. String to data type, string to Boolean should be false.
What about parse system root path?
That one is all the way at the top. Don't think, what was that one? I think empty string. Yeah. String to Boolean should be false. Now we just say if, again, not is nan, input data, and input data dot index of, and we're just going to put a period, not equal to -1. And we say return data equals true. So basically what that's saying is it not a number, and does it contain a period? Because if it contains a period, not equal to -1 means it contains a period. So if it contains a period and it is not a number, then it's a floating point number. And then else return data equals false. Again, redundant, but yes. All right, we got is string. Let's do is string. Maybe this will be our last one. Okay, let's try and do the last one here. Export const is string equals function input metadata, usual header, that function determines if the input string is a string or not. Process of elimination. AKA, if it's not a Boolean and not an integer and not a float, then it must be a string. Well, it's a little bit more to it than that. We have some other stuff we can do that helps it out, but a lot of it is process of elimination. So it's type string, and type Boolean. Input data is the string that should be checked if it is a string and not a Boolean, integer, or float. Okay, input metadata not used for this. And the return is a Boolean value of true to indicate if the input string is a string and not a Boolean, integer, or float. Or not, it would be one of those three data types disguised as a string. And it's not a crazy implementation, so we can get through it. That should be checked. String and not a Boolean, integer. I need to fix this. And then I'll get my authorship. date, a paste of our function contents, function name, if comes out, if is Boolean, input data, empty string equals false, and is integer, input data, empty string equals false, and is float, input data, empty string, false, and this is the interesting part, type of input data equals string, or input data instance of uppercase S string. By the way, this, when we say the type of, this has got to be in its own parentheses. So we're going to have double parentheses at the end, and that's what our if should look. So let me make sure you get it right here. Then we can say return data equals true. And I got some comments in here that you can leave off. It's fine, but we'll just do an else. Return data equals false. And the rest of that is the same. I got a note up here that I'm going to put in. I guess I'll put it at the end of this line. If it's not a Boolean and not an integer and not a float, then it must be a string. Especially given the type variable is a string. Okay, so now that's the kicker right there. It evaluates the type of is a string, or the instance of it is a string object. So with one of those two, we've guaranteed that it's a string and it's not these other three. So very clearly it's a string.
Mm-hmm.
Got it?
Yeah.
Now we got, let me count how many other functions. We still have to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 functions and one more internal function. So 6 functions total, but a lot of them are very similar, mostly around replacing and swapping characters. We don't have a whole lot left, 5 or 6 functions.
All right. Yeah, that sounds good.
Thank you.